Hey, this is Richard Himmer. I'm with my friend TJ Hoisington. We want to share some ideas with you. And first of all, the idea here, TJ, is we've known each other for 20, 25 years.
Yep.
When I first met you, you were sharing with me that you want to change people's lives.
Yep.
And you've been doing that now the entire time.
Yeah.
Successfully, no doubt, right?
Yeah.
But today we had the most interesting conversation, and we weren't seeing eye to eye on a topic. At least we didn't think we were. So I'd like to reconstruct that just a little bit and let them hear kind of what it means from our perspectives. Because I come from, at least from my world, I'm going to be a little bit more of a research base, right? I'm going to try to use the terms that I read in the research. And you're just so experiential rich. You know, you've got, and you've done a lot of research, but you've got this richness of what you do with people. So this is how it was introduced. You walked into my office just a minute ago.
And I saw a video of him saying on the video, affirmations don't work.
Yeah, he had a little bit of resistance to that.
So I said, explain that to me, because here's my logic. So my logic is human beings think at 800 to 14 or 1300 words per minute. We're using affirmations all the time. Whether we think we are or think we're not, we're always thinking. And anything you think over and over is usually considered an affirmation. I think you were referring to when someone writes down an affirmation, believing that by repeating a phrase over and over and over, it's going to change their identity or their belief or their reality at the subconscious level.
Now, there's a difference between an affirmation and a narrative.
Okay.
And lots of times, for example, if I were to say, oh, what was your name again? And you'd tell me your name, it's TJ. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so bad at remembering names.
That was an affirmation right there.
That's what I call a narrative.
Okay.
A narrative is something that you believe from the inside out, and it's your identity. It's who you are. I've just identified to you that I'm bad at remembering names, and so I fulfill the prophecy of not being able to remember your name. That's my narrative.
Right.
Doesn't mean that you're wrong or I'm right. It just means I'm using a term called a narrative that you were probably referring to as an affirmation.
Correct.
So when I said affirmations don't work, what I meant by that, and then I'd like you to address this.
Okay.
I see people putting up slogans, signs all over their office or all over their house. They walk in.
Yep.
And so we have them inside of our religion. We have them inside of our organizations, everywhere we go. That's an affirmation. It's an outside-in saying, idea.
Right.
And what we're thinking that's going to happen is if I can say enough, you're a good hitter. Let's say we're playing, I'm a Little League coach. TJ, you're a good hitter.
Then I'll be a good hitter.
You're going to be a good hitter.
It'll become a truth and reality.
Every day I want you to look at that. I'm a good hitter. But if your narrative is, I'm scared of the ball.
Then you're going to resist.
Okay.
Right? You're going to push back.
So in that conversation that we had a minute ago, you shared some really interesting things with me, specifically a story. So I want to go back just a minute. An affirmation is not effective from my perspective from outside in. So cognitive to subconscious.
Okay.
I suggest that if you're going to be an affirmation, you have to penetrate into the subconscious and internally, using one's imagination, which is a subconscious function, then what you're doing is you're talking to your true self. That's who you really are.
Right.
So the story you told me was fascinating about being
No, it's
ID'd,
just a simple
right?
story, right?
But it's so good. And I misunderstood it too, because I thought you were being carded for buying beer.
Yeah, no. So I was just telling you that several years ago, I had this, what now I look back and consider a weakness or a bad thinking process, is that when someone would ask to see my ID, when I would go into a store and buy a shirt or, go somewhere to buy something, they would look at my credit card or debit card, and then they would say, can I see your ID, please? Immediately, I would interpret that interaction as they didn't trust me, right? And so I felt like, well, why don't you trust me? Have I given you any reason why you can't trust that that's my card? Now, in hindsight, I would since learn that I am thankful that they checked my ID because it was actually a benefit for me. But at the time, I wasn't viewing it that way. So I would go up to buy something, and before I even paid for something or pulled out my credit card, I would have all kinds of emotions and frustrations already building up in me. So having taught these principles for a long time, I thought to myself, TJ, slow down in life, slow down enough, use some of the tools that you know to be true, and practice it. So I remember sitting in my car before I went into the store, and I sat right there in the driver's seat. I closed my eyes. I imagined myself picking out the shirt I want, going to the counter, paying for it, them asking me for my driver's license, and then me responding with a smile and handing them my driver's license and saying thank you at the same time. Now, on the first 2 movie run-throughs that I did imagining that, before I even went into the store, it felt uncomfortable. But by the 10th time, I started to notice all the benefits of not having to live with this frustration anymore in life. And by the 10th time, I felt like I was rehearsed. So then what do? The best thing you can do for your subconscious mind in an area of performance, I think, is when you spend time imagining, and then you go act it out. And that just confirms the reality of what you had just imagined. So what did I do? I went and picked out the shirt. Before they even asked me for my ID, I was proactive because I had imagined this. I pulled out my ID. I handed them my ID with my card, and it was a positive experience. And I will say that since that time, that was some 17 years ago, till now, I don't have any negative emotions associated with someone asking for my ID. Now, it seems like a trivial thing, but over the years, as I've shared that story, there have been many people that say, oh man, I struggle with the same thing. So I know I'm not alone. But what I found was if I'll spend more time internally working on this stuff, I didn't have something I was reading, I was having something I was specifically imagining a better future. So my point with, I know you got something to say here, but my point, I know I'm going. But my point in saying that I just see writing it down sometimes as a tool, a starting tool that maybe only equals 1% or 5% of the process. The real power in making change in terms of performance and so forth is spending time internally. And I remember last time I was here, I showed you on my Instagram account how there's that quote about the greatest vision board you can ever create is not the one you put on your wall, it's the one you put in your head, or you create in your head.
So all these thoughts came through my mind as you were describing this narrative, which is in harmony with what I was trying to say. So first of all, let's start with the outside in, writing it down. It's a cognitive endeavor.
Right.
And it only goes so far as you're aware of what you're doing. So if all you ever do is write it down and then walk by and see it, read it, or say it, you're not really going to get the benefit of being inside. What you did differently that I heard you say is I went inside, I used my imagination, I closed my eyes. Now the first time through, that would have been your false self telling you that, one,
that's not you.
If I remember, people don't trust me and I don't trust people, and there were a number of other things you said about the feelings you have when you go to buy something. Okay, now that's a narrative that you're telling yourself about yourself in that moment. What you're doing is you're coming in and you're saying, well, here's my narrative, and I would argue, TJ, that's your false self, because your true self, your best self, doesn't let other people's behavior have an influence.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got this false narrative going on at the subconscious level based upon past experiences. So you believe something based upon this experiential bias.
Correct.
So now you go in the car and you recreate a new scene. Or let's get rid
Imagine ahead of time.
You create a new scene, a vision of this new scene, right? So as you start walking through this scene, the same emotions come at you because you're imagining it, and those emotions, the brain can't tell if you're doing it for real.
The subconscious mind can't.
Or if you're just imagining it. So you had it the first time and you go, oh, that's what I normally feel. But you've just gone what I call bypass the critical faculty. You went out of the cognitive into the subconscious, and it's your subconscious now doing the training. And what you told me in the other room was this. You said, Rich, that's neuroplasticity. I'm creating new neurons. And I'm saying, yeah. That's exactly, that's what I'm saying.
New neural pathways, you bet.
So neurons that fire together wire together.
Correct.
And you just imagine it, if you're just aware of it, you have a new neuron that's been created, neurons.
Right.
Well, you just did it one full cycle.
That's right.
So you started this little path. Then you created another path. You looked at it again. A whole new cycle. The path gets a little bit deeper. By the third or fourth time that you're going through this, you're starting to go, I'm a little more comfortable with this. This is starting to make sense to me. This is starting to feel normal to me. But by the time you got to the 10th one.
That was good.
Yeah.
I was ready to go do it. I was ready to get out of the car. Let's go make it a reality.
So the narrative that you were telling yourself at that time was overcome by an internal
change.
Yeah. And I don't mind calling that an affirmation as long as we qualify it with it was internal. It was done at the subcortical level.
I haven't ever shared this story with you. So my wife, over the years, now this is going back 15 years, but in the first few years of our marriage, she would share with me this experience she had with an old boyfriend that wasn't really positive, a little bit against her will kind of stuff. Okay. She was bugged by it. And every once in a while, it would creep up in her.
This experience,
right? And she would tell me about it because we're open communicators. I said, honey, do you want to get rid of that forever? She says, absolutely.
So you're doing therapy on your bride?
Absolutely.
Just checking.
These principles ring true, right?
They're universal.
They're universal.
Right.
So what do? I remember we were sitting on the master bed, her back against the wall, and I coached her through. I didn't even know what the details were of this experience. I didn't know. Let me rephrase that. I didn't need to know. What I did was I had her imagine herself as a confident young 16-year-old going back into that same situation, but being a confident person. And what would you do with now that better?
Oh, fascinating. Yeah.
Better confident person, if you will. She played that image 12 or 15 times, that movie 12 or 15 times. I made sure she had color in the movie. I made sure there was sound in the movie. And then I had her imagine all the positive aspects that would have happened had she made a different decision in that situation. And then we played that over and over, the better choices that she had made.
I would call that her true self.
Her true self.
Overcame
She aligned with
self.
her true self.
Right.
And she went back and replayed that true self. And
right.
I will tell you right now, if she was sitting here right now, and you know Danielle, she would tell you she's never had any issues with that experience since. Right? Her brain was rewired to view emotionally and reactively view that situation totally differently.
So an interesting story here would be, too often we approach that very same thing. So if I'm in a therapist's chair, that we do it the outside in. We'd be cognitively, well, what was that like for you? And you talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then the next time you came in, you talk about it again. Right. In one moment, you bypassed what we call the critical faculty. You went from cognitive to subconscious. Right. And I argue this is 10%. This is 90%.
Oh yeah, this is where the power is right here.
Infinite power is what is
right.
categorized. And Danielle, at that moment, had an opportunity to bring in her authentic self, that true her,
right,
and overcome a false narrative that was been sabotaging her for how many years?
Yep, yeah, it had to be at least 10 years.
That's a long time
to hold on to something.
Harboring something over and over again. And that harboring aspect is where we get chronic illness and chronic pain. Where we do things maladaptively, we have no idea why we're doing, but we do it anyway. Right. And we can watch ourselves as though we were watching it, and I'm going, why am I doing this? But it's because of something that happened there. So I want to go back to
something. Now, why did it take 10 years, though? Because I think human beings often don't change until they reach the day of disgust. They reach the day of threshold, right? So sometimes we will do the same thing over and over because the pain isn't bad enough to change, so we stay with the norm, the familiar zone. Right.
So we don't change until the pain of the change is perceived to be less than the existing pain that we have.
Correct. Well said.
And so what happens when people go back to familiar, it's like the woman or the wife who gets beat up by her husband, stuck in the hospital. He gets arrested, thrown in jail.
But 6 months later, they're back together.
Or 3 weeks later, when she's out of the hospital, she bails him out.
Totally.
Could be 3 hours.
That's right.
And the question is, why? Why do you do that? And she will not cognitively have a good answer.
We know in part one of those answers could be, right, the pain of the unknown or uncertainty outweighs what at least I can depend on knowing how I can manipulate situations with this person.
And her challenge is that she'll go back to what she knows.
She'll go back to what
she'll go back to the familiar. A dog always returns to the vomit. I mean, does it sound very good? But really, we as humans, that's what we're doing.
Right.
So back to the narrative earlier, You imagined the change. Neurons fired together, wired together, created a new pathway. You were
I
able
felt
to work.
emotion that aligned with a positive emotion. So I played it enough times in my mind that the feeling I had was positive.
And it was authentic.
It was real.
Was it making it up?
No.
And just a quick sidebar. That's because affirmations outside in don't give you the emotions. Don't give you the feelings.
Yeah, it has to sink into this.
Right.
But here's my point with that, in my little disagreement with you. And we don't really disagree, right? Because we're on the same page. Is that sometimes, for some people that haven't been walked through these processes, with someone that can coach you through this process, writing it down can be a starting place of awareness. But it ends really quick.
It's an iterative process, is what you're saying. Yeah. It can start with writing it down. Then you compound. You do it again, and then you learn how to bypass that critical faculty, move into the subconscious, use your imagination.
And how do you do that? You put that piece of paper aside, and you go there in your imagination.
You own it.
You own it.
And that narrative then is able to change. A narrative, by definition, is your experiences that you've had in your life combined with your beliefs. So when you say, let's do the fat one, right? If you offer me some food, some cake, and I say, no, TJ, I'm trying to lose weight. I'm on a diet. My narrative is based upon my experiences that I'm trying to lose weight, but I really don't do very well. That's why I'm saying I'm trying to lose weight. So based upon past experiences, which are biased, I'm going to say I'm trying to lose weight. So my identity really is I'm fat. But what if I was able to work with that? And there's a lot of good stories. Well, let me just tell you the story. This is a fun story. Guy lost 100 plus pounds. He compounded, like what you said when you write it down. So here's his story. He started out by saying, I am overweight. I want to lose weight. I need to figure out how to lose weight. So what he did was he started habit stacking every day, a new habit. The first habit that he worked with was he needs to put on his tennis shoes when he gets home from work. In the past, he did put on slacks or sweats, go sit on the sofa, and be exhausted. He put on his tennis shoes. After 5 minutes, he took his tennis shoes off, put on his sweats, and went lay on the sofa. But he did that for like a week or two. And he said, okay, now, instead of just my tennis shoes, I'm going to put on my workout clothes.
Right.
So for a week plus, he came home from work, changed his clothes, put on his workout clothes, put on his tennis shoes, waited for 5 minutes, took them off, and went back to sit on the sofa. And then he decided, well, I'm going to drive to the gym now. So every step, he just did it for weeks at a time, right? So then he started driving to the gym, walks in, checks in, walks out, goes home. So he just did a circle around the checkout counter. Then he said, I'm going to stay for 5 minutes. So then he worked out. He walked the track for 5 minutes. Then he says, well, I'm going to go longer than that. So now, because he's already now every day putting his clothing on, his
This
sweats.
guy must be really analytical, man, because I'm an all-in kind of guy. I'm not going to take
But it doesn't work for everyone.
That's true.
Going
Everybody's
all in, you
different.
just can't switch from a narrative that I'm fat, I'm overweight, and I'll never lose weight because I've tried it 30 times. So he says, I'm going to develop a habit. And if I develop this habit, and I'm doing it off of an innocuous, a very benign habit, I come home and change my clothing. He habit stacked upon a habit he's already doing, but he's putting on a different set of clothing. Then he put on more clothing, and then he drove somewhere. And then he actually walked around the track, and then he started working out since he's there. It was 2 years. This is a gradual program over 2 years. He lost over 100 pounds. But instead of just losing the weight, which anyone can say, I lost weight, I see all these testimonials of people losing weight. But what I don't see is 3 years later, 4 years later, and 5 years later.
Well, statistically, 1 year later, they've gained the weight back.
The weight off.
Yeah.
We're moving into the new year right now. There's going to be thousands, if not millions, of New Year's resolutions. How many of them will last the first week?
Yeah.
Because the narrative is saying you really aren't that way.
Right.
We want to change the narrative down at the core level. And your idea, the way you presented what you did, I don't know if you'd studied that or you just figured that out.
Well, I studied around it, and then I thought, I'm teaching some of these concepts. Let me practice on myself.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
But I think it goes to the Dave discussed, right? Whether it be that person who lost 100 pounds or me that Or Danielle, who took 10 years to really let it come to a head, where she was just bugged by it that she wanted to change. Everybody reaches that place to change, that strong desire to change at a
So
different place.
let's recap this then, TJ. Looking for a good conflict here, but we ended up agreeing. So remember, conflict is just, we have the same goal. We want to be healthy. We want to be happy. We sometimes see different ways of getting there. A lot of people will use what we call affirmations. So summarizing what we talked about today, how does an affirmation truly work? And let's not concern ourselves with the semantics.
If you use an affirmation, the power for an affirmation to work, it has to come from within. You have to be able to go to that picture and see yourself performing that way, or achieving that goal, or being that kind of person internally. But you may want to write it down just for starters.
If that's where you need to go.
If that's where you need to go, you may not need to go there.
And lots of times when folks come in the office, or I'm just dealing with them, I have my son's friends come over, and we'll do an affirmation with them. We just give them a time to be able to do some connecting from within, and we call it mindfulness, and that'd be a fun segment to do. But mindfulness is a great way to connect from the inside out. Affirmations work great, from my mind's eye, if you're connecting at the subconscious level.
We agree.
Trying to bring it on the outside oftentimes is very challenging, and it doesn't normally work. Well, this has been a riot.
It's fun, right?
Let's do this again.
Let's do it again.
All right. We'll tell you next time. Thanks for listening.